Yeah.
Yeah.
For anybody listening, Dr. Ellen Goldstein is joining us here on the Zaddy Zone today to talk all things fertility, conception, etc. Dr. Ellen, would you mind just introducing yourself a little bit? Tell us a bit about you.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm really excited to get to talk to everybody here today. I am a reproductive endocrinologist that is an infertility specialist. We are subspecialty OB-GYNs, which means that the initial part of my medical training was having babies flying at my head all night long, taking care of endless yeast infections. Also, GYN cancer, the full breadth of gynecologic care. But infertility is a specialty within the field. We do an extra 3 years of training to be able to take care of everything related to fertility and hormonal disorders for women. So I am actually the medical director of a brand new private practice in the middle of Century City in Los Angeles. It's just me. I do everything for my patients here. I get to practice exactly the way I want to.
Great. So I'm guessing that the fact that you're opening your own spot in LA means that you're needed here. And would I be right in assuming that there's been an uptick in cases of infertility, even in Los Angeles?
It's really interesting. It's a very busy market. There are a lot of fertility doctors here, but yes, there's a need. It was interestingly during COVID, all fertility practices all over the country saw an increase in demand. I think some of that was existential. I think that people were at home. They were focusing on what was important in their lives, making sure they wanted to get their family building taken care of.
Yes.
We really saw a lot of fertility care and also egg freezing in these last few years.
Yeah, interesting. I've been hearing that there is an infertility, I don't know what to call it, an infertility crisis worldwide.
Yeah.
Is that true, or am I just hearing things?
For me, what's interesting is by the time they get to me, I'm focused on the patient in front of me and trying to get that particular person or couple pregnant. So it's not something that I'm super expert at, but I tried really hard to take a look into it because I knew you were really interested in it. And one of the main things I found is that a lot of it is social, cultural, geopolitical kind of forces. And that in many of the countries where the fertility rates are declining the most, it's because there's such poor support for women to be mothers, and that they're not getting the kind of support that they need from the government, from their partners, from their families, to even have an average of one child per person. Many places the fertility rates are below one child, below replacement rate. So I really looked into trying to figure out if it was a real fertility crisis or or whether it was due to cultural forces. I think that certainly we are all seeing also a true decline in fertility from a medical standpoint, and that has a number of reasons. Do you want me to kind of go into them?
Oh, please, yes.
Yeah, certainly. I think a lot of it really does have to do with increasing age. I mean, we're all just putting off. Everybody's professionals now, and in one or two every generation, it seems like the average age of having children is just getting older. And so as much as that just increases the average age at which people are trying, it gives more time for all of the medical conditions that can contribute to fertility issues to build up. Certain things like endometriosis is going to get worse with every year if you have that. And also just simple age-related declines in fertility. We can talk about sperm too.
I definitely want to talk about how, male fertility influences all this too, because it's always a big focus is, egg freezing obviously is a focus on female fertility. And I know that, men are 50% of the deal here. So I'd love to talk about how what percentage is, maybe a good question is, what percentage of the couples that you're seeing coming in, the heterosexual couples in particular, have the issue be with the male?
Yeah, it's usually roughly 1/3 of the couples will have a clear issue with the sperm or the man.
Got it.
And then another third of couples have either a definable issue with both members of the couple, or unexplained infertility, which is very, very common. And in that situation, it's like we haven't actually figured out what the issue is, but it certainly very well could be the sperm, just something that doesn't show up on the available tests that we have these days.
Yeah, got it. Actually, one more question back to the whole world issue. You kind of were mentioning that to your mind, it's mostly a cultural thing more than it is a worldwide health problem. Declining testosterone rates could affect it.
Right.
Is it in your mind more cultural than it is physical?
I think that's probably the consensus, especially when you're reading about particular places like you had mentioned that you thought South Korea and Italy, and like when I looked those things up, I found a lot more articles about the social and cultural factors than I did about any, but unfortunately it's also just very hard to measure, right? Like our scientific methods have changed drastically in this last few decades, and it's possible that we just didn't have the right ways to measure what was a national fertility rate in some of these countries 40 years ago versus what it is now.
And then I imagine it was probably hard to measure then hormone, what was a healthy hormone rate? Like what was a healthy rate of progesterone, estrogen, testosterone, correct?
For sure. And it's only been, it's been fairly recently that we have more information about, these forever chemicals, the plastics that are that our foods are wrapped in, that could be contributing to disruptions in all of that.
Yeah. Let's just get right to that. I want to talk about that.
Okay.
What are the environmental factors that are influencing, infertility?
So the biggest one that I have come across is plastics, and these things that, these little tiny microplastics that just stay in your system forever. And that's also what the urologists that I've spoken to, the male fertility doctors, also think is contributing to decline in sperm quality. So especially things like when you have plastic that's heated. So like if you're drinking from plastic bottles that are then warm in your car or in your food, or you're microwaving it, those kinds of things can disrupt hormonal signaling. And the other thing is, even like, I'm totally not a cell phone engineer, but just the cell phones in their pockets seems to be a pretty big contributor. So it's like just trying to keep your cell phone like away from your man parts is probably a helpful thing.
Yes, but just to clarify, the plastics and particularly what we're talking about now, the plastics and the cell phones, this is particularly in regards to male fertility? Mostly. I think you're also like, it's all things that nobody is studying in great detail. Yep. I mean, it's also interesting about the plastic bottles thing is we're like, well, especially if they're warm, but it's like, you don't know where a plastic bottle has been before you. You buy it at the store, but that doesn't mean it hasn't been left out in the heat previously. So that all those, all those plastics have leaked into the water that you're then drinking. It's so interesting that you're bringing this up because, a friend of mine, a couple who are friends of mine in Los Angeles were having trouble conceiving, and the doctor found that it was an issue with him. And the advice to him was stop drinking out of plastic bottles, get your cell phone out of the front of your front pocket. Don't keep it in your front pocket, and stop riding the Peloton so much.
I definitely think he should ride his Peloton as much as he wants.
Really?
I don't agree. Yeah, no, I think exercise is really good. It's good for everybody.
For sure.
I mean, I'm not his doctor, so I can't say, but like, I'm not convinced about the data about riding a bike. I think that only people who are on a bike for hours and hours every day might possibly compromise their sperm. I think exercise is good for everybody.
There's no doubt that exercise is good for everyone. He actually was one of those people who was doing multiple Peloton rides a day.
Oh, did he just like to watch? Did he like some of the female instructors? Is that?
I used to have a Peloton. I'm aware of what you're talking about. Yeah, I mean, he just like loves to exercise and like would do it multiple times a day. I think to quieten his busy brain. But something that the doctor mentioned was a shortening of the sperm. Is that an actual thing, a shortening of the sperm?
We look at something called sperm morphology, which is the shape under the microscope. And so what's super interesting actually is that men are churning out millions and millions of sperm like every second of their lives. And they do it at the expense of perfection. It's quantity over quality for sure. And so what's interesting is that a normal sperm morphology is anything 4% or greater. So as long as you are having 4% of your sperm or more looking normal, you've like passed with flying colors. And I will say that I actually rarely see a huge percentage of the semen analyses that I see have morphologies under 4%. And so, I don't usually look at it in such granular detail to tell somebody like what the actual shape change is, because there are so many different, they have like 2 heads or 4 heads, or the tails are twisty or something. And it's really just saying
that's horrifying. It's amazing that we don't have kids with 2 heads, or
Well, the abnormally shaped ones, the abnormally shaped sperm are like the wingmen. They're like, you have to have all those abnormal sperm to swim in a pack to get so that you're normally shaped. It's like, the most handsome fraternity brother is the one that like actually gets to the bar and gets the girl, but everybody else
yes.
Get there. Yeah.
Helps them get there. So what happens if an abnormal sperm reaches the egg? They usually have trouble getting in there just by default. They just can't make it in there.
That is a super interesting question and like an area of very hot debate. What we typically think in our field is typically that eggs and sperm and even embryos are so delicate that they're really all or nothing. Like an egg or a sperm or an embryo has to be quite close to normal to even function, and so typically, if an embryo can't make a baby, it's going to either not implant or it's going to cause an early miscarriage. And so there's all these checks and balances that go on in human reproduction, which is a highly inefficient process. So we typically think that the bad sperm just aren't really going to get there or do anything. Definitely, we are really looking very closely if there is a sperm contribution to things like recurrent miscarriage or recurrent fertility treatment failure. But the jury's still kind of out on it. And we, in the field of reproduction and in the field of urology, we debate it between ourselves a lot.
Yeah, got it. Now, I heard this thing ages ago, and you could tell me if this is true. There's a few questions I've got like this, where it's things that I've heard that I'm not sure if they're true. Is it true that an egg can push away a sperm if it doesn't think it's correct? Or like not take it in on purpose because it's not of a high enough quality?
How would you test that?
I don't know. I wouldn't know. I'm just like, it's Doc. Don't shoot the messenger here. This is like table talk. This is dinner table conversation for me that I've heard over years, and I'd love to know if it's true.
I think to an extent it probably is, right? It's probably the same thing that I just said, right? That if you have an otherwise fertile couple and she has healthy eggs, if the sperm isn't functional, it's not going to get in there. And I think that maybe that it is a very important crosstalk between the egg and the sperm, and that potentially these abnormal sperm are just not talking properly to the eggs.
My friend actually brought up an interesting point with me. She told me about an ex-boyfriend that she had who, whenever they would have sex, she would get kind of a rash breakout. And she went to the doctor, and the doctor gave her antibiotics to deal with it, to take every time she had sex with him. And that seems to me like what we're talking about, where it's like these two people are not supposed to be mating.
Do you think it was antibiotics, or do you think it was actually like an immune suppression? Like I suspect maybe she had like an allergy. That can totally happen.
Right. And that's what I guess I don't know the specifics, but it would be that her body and his body are not supposed to be mating.
Yeah, there are certainly people that have allergies to components of, I don't know that it's going to be quite so granular that like if you put their eggs and sperm together in a dish, they wouldn't work. But I think it's more that she has some allergy to a component of his seminal fluid, which definitely can happen. So
But
did
that's wild.
did they listen to nature? Did they listen to nature
Yes,
and they broke up?
Yeah, they broke up, which I think is that was the correct thing to do. But I think that maybe I'm getting woo woo here, but I think that your body often is giving you signals of, for instance, smell. That's not woo woo. Pheromonally, sure. Like what you match with and what you smell, and you go, yeah, that's it. And then you can smell people and go, that's not it. And that's actually listening to your body in a way. You don't think that's woo woo, do you?
Sure. No, I think that's human attraction for sure.
Yeah, Doc, come on the woo woo side.
I'm trying to walk a balance today, Luke. I'm walking the balance between like my Western medicine and your woo woo. How am I doing?
Yeah, no, you're doing great. You're doing great. Okay. So we covered plastic, phones, Peloton. You're not a problem with unless you're on it for too long. Are there anything else? Like, are there any other environmental factors that you're aware of that can affect fertility?
Well, the unpopular one is the drugs and the marijuana. Go into that.
Yes, please go into it. Yeah.
It's so hard. I have no idea what to say. I feel like 70% of the people that walk into my office while they're like actively trying to get pregnant and they're devastated that they can't, they're also smoking weed every day.
Wow.
And I just can't imagine that is healthy for your eggs and your sperm. They can't, it makes them a little bit wobbly and they can't get to where they need to go, I think.
Okay. So that's not something that you can't imagine why. You actually know that that's true. Do you? There's
not great evidence for that either. It has not been well studied. I think we're hitting on a lot of things that don't have great studies behind them. And so you can find data for both. You can find data that people who smoke marijuana are fine, and you can find data that it impacts both egg and sperm quality.
But something that you've noticed in your clinic is that people coming in who are having trouble getting pregnant smoke a lot of pot.
Yeah. I think people in LA just smoke a lot of pot.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is a very California doctor issue. Yeah, exactly. A lot of people smoke pot in this state. Now that it's legal. And so that's really interesting. What about alcohol? Yeah.
That's an interesting one. I think very heavy alcohol consumption for sure, or even not very heavy, just heavy, moderate to heavy alcohol consumption can definitely impact both female and male fertility. But this is a hard one because I think, and this is a good segue into talking about just how much control do you have over your own fertility? And so I am not a doctor who goes crazy with telling my patients to change a lot of things in their lifestyles. People come to me on these crazy diets, no alcohol, no caffeine. And for me, I think that's, life without coffee is not worth living. And so the more you try to tell your patients that they have to adopt this insane, live like a monk while they're trying to get pregnant, the more they're going to blame themselves thinking that they have control over something that they don't have often very much control over at all. Sure. And the more they're going to blame themselves when if something doesn't work and they're not successful, and then they're going to be like, if I hadn't had that one cup of coffee last week, which is ridiculous. You have to people have to have some grace for themselves. And there's such an emotional process. There's so much self-blame going on. I think it's totally okay to have some wine here and there.
Yeah. They shame spiral is what you're talking about. Yeah. Yeah. They did something wrong and they feel like they've morally failed, and that's why their body isn't doing what they wanted to. And I think what you're talking about too is also there's a huge amount of stress that goes into having the perfect diet and having the perfect lifestyle. And if you're stressing yourself further, I'm sure that would affect your fertility.
What I say is don't stress about your stress. You're just compounding it. It's not, everybody's got stress. And if you think about it, right? Yes, when you're having trouble getting pregnant, you're going to analyze your life and you're going to find all of these sources of stress. But I guarantee you that that your neighbor down the street who didn't have any trouble getting pregnant also has, family stress and stress with her job and everything. And so I really think it's that people are sort of assigning blame to all of these normal parts of their lives. And then they just, again, stress spiral and it becomes just so miserable. When I'm working with people, I just have to make sure that they can get through their daily lives. I do a lot of validation and support, and making sure that people can just live their lives while they're going through this.
Oh, that's great. I love that. So I guess you're probably into giving measured advice. It's not too crazy. It's not living like a monk. Can you give us like an insight into what that might be? Like smoking not once a day, but maybe once a week, like cutting back on alcohol, not cutting it out.
Right. I mean, the marijuana, I tend to tell people to really stop if they can. But the alcohol, a glass of wine a couple times a week, totally fine. Coffee, 1 or 2 cups a day. Normal exercise, honestly. There are certain times during fertility treatment when you have to curtail your high impact exercise, but really cardio is not hurting anybody. It's really good for your stress, and you'll get all kinds of this advice, usually very paternalistic, like from old male doctors that are like, if you go for a run, your uterus is not getting blood flow. Like, it's like ridiculous, So you definitely need to be able to live your life.
I'm always amazed at hearing the advice of old male doctors to women about women's health issues. Like, for instance, in the birthing room, it's like, put your feet in the stirrups and spread your legs. And it's like, that's the last place I want to be when I'm giving birth to a baby.
Yeah, for sure.
This might be a bit of an uncomfortable question, but is there an effect on obese individuals and fertility? Is there do they relate in any way?
Yeah, certainly when you do look at, we do have good studies to show that women who are overweight or obese have lower fertility rates in general, and they also can often have lower success rates with fertility treatments. First of all, it has to do with just the impact of the extra body weight on your hormonal regulation and your ovulation. So interestingly, what happens is that fat cells make estrogen. And so when you have higher, and then what happens is, normally in a normal hormonal cycle, only the ovaries make estrogen. You go from a very low baseline level when you first get your period. In a given month, when you first get a period in a month, then your one egg grows, and as your egg grows, it makes estrogen, and then that signals to your brain to ovulate that one egg. And then the estrogen and progesterone levels kind of hum along for the last 2 weeks of your cycle. And then if you're not pregnant, you get a period. And so what happens is that extra weight that people are carrying around makes enough estrogen to disrupt the signaling between the brain and the ovary. And so there's kind of 2 different forms that can take. One is the very clear kind of polycystic ovary syndrome picture, which is incredibly common. About 1 in every 8 young women are going to be on the polycystic ovary syndrome spectrum. Now, not every person with PCOS is obese at all. There is a spectrum of likely a whole bunch of different causes, and plenty of people have PCOS and do not actually have a weight problem. But there is a correlation where there are many people with PCOS who do have a weight problem, and that sort of exacerbates it. And the really cool thing is that if you have PCOS and you're overweight, if you go and exercise and sweat and get your body to use its fat stores a little bit, even losing something like 5 or 10 pounds, a huge proportion of those people start to either ovulate on their own, or they respond much more easily to ovulation induction medications and get pregnant without significant treatment. It's such a hard conversation to have with people, and I have to have I have to be so careful when I bring it up. But sometimes with the right receptive person, it's such a win. Recently, I had somebody where I barely had to say, look, you have prediabetes. She's like, you're right. You're 100% right. I'm going to the gym. I'm going to my primary care doctor. And within a couple of months, she was pregnant. It was amazing.
Amazing. That must be so rewarding.
Yeah. Sorry, it wasn't a couple of months. She lost like 40 pounds. And then a couple months after that, and then, it was under a year. Within under a year, she had lost 40 pounds and she was pregnant. I was so proud of her.
Wow, that's amazing. So do you usually send, like, in an instance like that, would you send them to a primary care doctor for advice on how to, lose weight? Or would you give them some measured advice on how to lose weight? Kind of like the alcohol thing, like cut back on it. Yeah. Like, how do you usually go about that?
That's such a good question. I think it very much depends on the person and what resources she has. I have such excellent colleagues in the field of weight loss medicine and nutrition who work very closely with people who need that kind of support. And the problem is that, like everybody in LA, they run a good business and they're cash pay. And it's like the same, that the people who need it the most are often the people who can't afford it. And so that's when I really try to make sure that people have that primary care. But then, of course, access to primary care is also horrible, too. People are so, the primary care doctors are so busy that they have a hard time giving the kind of attention that patients like this need. And it's just, so I try my very best to be supportive.
Amazing. I have a lot of friends who are, especially my wife's friends, who are of a certain age and don't have a partner yet, but they want to at one point be mums, and they're freezing their eggs. Is there an ideal age? Because we talked about age before and age factors. Yeah. Is there an ideal age to freeze your eggs?
That's an awesome question too. So there have been really, really good studies on this showing that there is kind of like a sweet spot, because this is a study of both of cost effectiveness and how likely you are to actually need your frozen eggs. So the reason why egg freezing is a really good idea for people to think about is that as we get older, we have fewer and fewer genetically normal eggs in our ovaries. So the way that ovaries age is that all of the eggs in your ovaries have been sitting there since you were a fetus in your mother. So my daughter, the egg that made her, formed in my mother. So there's this very cool generational effect there. Our eggs sit in our ovaries from the time that we are a fetus, and the DNA has to sit in the middle of the egg lined up. And so when that egg actually, once you're 35, 36, 37 years old, and it's time for that egg to ovulate, it has to separate its DNA right down the middle so that it has the right amount of DNA to make a baby. And as we get older, now these statistics are very, very depressing. And that is one thing that I know people really don't want to hear, that their age is the most important factor here. And it's a disconnect, certainly, between the general public and between a doctor like me, where I feel like when I say that your age is the factor, I'm not blaming you for anything. It should be an easier thing to hear, but it's very hard for people to hear. And as we get older, when you're under 35, 50% of your eggs are genetically normal. And it's 50% whether you're 23 or 32. It doesn't really decline until you're 35. And at 35, it goes off a cliff. By 38, only 25% of your eggs are normal. By 40, only 10% of your eggs are normal. And by 42, only 3% of your eggs are normal. So Now, if you get lucky and you get that normal egg, that's a healthy baby. There is no global decline in your egg quality. It's a shifting of proportions. And so what you're trying to do is find that good egg as you get older. And so what happens is, certainly many women who are 37, 38, even 40 won't have trouble getting pregnant. And that's amazing. But if they have trouble, then often if they have frozen eggs from when they're younger, those younger eggs can help me treat them because they have that higher proportion of normal eggs. So that was a long-winded intro to your question.
That was great.
But the optimal age, I have a lot to say. I'm sorry, Luke, you have to tell me if I'm over talking here.
Oh no, I like the way you get through things. It's like we've done an hour podcast in half an hour. That's what I'm loving. Please keep going.
Maybe I talk too fast also.
No, it's great.
So the optimal age is probably 32 to 33. And I'll tell you why. If everybody started freezing their eggs at 28, yes, you'd have a lot of good eggs in the freezer, but you'd also have a lot of good eggs that people would never come back to use, because a high proportion of those people are going to try to get pregnant when they're 32 or even 35 and not have any trouble at all and never need those eggs. Whereas if people don't start thinking about freezing until they're 37, well, a lot of those people are going to need their eggs, because if they're thinking about it at 37, it means they might not be trying until they're 40 or 41, and then they're going to really significantly possibly need those eggs. But the issue is that by 37, remember, I already said their eggs have there's a lower normality proportion. And so the sweet spot where, at least a decent number of people might come back to use them, and also still have good eggs, is that age 32, 33. And another interesting thing is that nationwide, probably only about 10% of people who have ever frozen their eggs in this country have come back so far to use them.
Only 10% of the people who have frozen eggs come back to use them in this country. It's so interesting to talk about aging in this way, because, 30, it's quite specific, the age. But it's like, it must be dependent on the individual, how old their organs are. Do you speak in that sense, like in the way that like organs can be different ages within different people?
It's a really, really good question. And I think it's not going to be a popular answer among your listeners. While I absolutely agree with you that there's such a difference in general health, but across individuals, depending on how well they've taken care of themselves, their diet, their exercise, all of those things. The ovaries don't age like that. It's like ovaries really, it's just the chronological age. And another thing that's super interesting is that normality proportion holds for everybody. Everybody has different egg numbers, but the proportion of normal eggs is different, and is the same across ages. And the other thing is that your general health also doesn't correlate with your egg numbers. So this is a lot of, it's not a popular answer, I know, but this is the kind of conversation that I have to have with people all of the time. Because as you can imagine, they really go into a spiral of, but I'm healthy, what did I
why have I been healthy? Why have I been good?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Gosh, amazing. Well, what about, are there any like general supplements that you will give men and women that, full disclosure here, we met via WeNatal, who I'm a big fan of. They do a great fertility kind of multivitamin. Also, you can be used after you give birth. I forget what that's called. It can be a prenatal and after, whatever.
For sure.
Is there a supplement that you like to prescribe, just generally, like a multivitamin that's super helpful for men and women?
Yeah. So first of all women who are possibly going to get pregnant anytime soon should be taking a prenatal vitamin like WeNatal, which is an awesome one. It needs to have folic acid in it or methylfolate, because you need to have a form of folate in order to make sure that you reduce your risk of having a spinal cord issue with the baby. And that needs to be in your system for several months before you get pregnant. So it's a sort of a planning thing to do. Now, antioxidants are very helpful for both egg and sperm quality. So CoQ10 is a big one that seems to really be permeating the general, like the psyche right now, that everybody feels like they need to be on CoQ10. CoQ10 is sort of a cellular metabolism aid, and can just help your cells make energy efficiently and with fewer sort of compromising byproducts. And so many people are taking CoQ10, both men and women. The best thing for sperm is also antioxidants. So they can take those kinds of supplements, but I believe in food as medicine. And so blueberries, pomegranates, and acai berries are amazing for sperm. Those are antioxidant foods.
Dark chocolate, would you add that to the list?
Sure. Absolutely. If you like it.
I reckon you're just agreeing with me because you like dark chocolate.
I like milk chocolate.
I mean, everybody likes milk chocolate, but if you're going to go health, you go to dark chocolate. Because, I mean, it is high in polyphenols.
For sure.
It can also be high in other heavy metals, but, it's pretty high in polyphenols. Yes, but blueberries are pretty fantastic powerhouse for that type of thing. So folate. antioxidants, CoQ10. You mentioned anything else?
Those are really the big ones. The other cool one is melatonin. There's some good, there's some decent research that melatonin can help with fertility. It's really unclear whether it's like actually helping with egg quality or whether it's just sort of, general, you sleep better, everything.
You sleep well.
I love melatonin is like the best drug. It makes me feel I have the best dreams. How does it affect you? It's the best.
Now you're talking about you're taking melatonin. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Well, doctors are I've talked to a few doctors on here, not fertility specialists, who kind of warn against taking melatonin because it can interrupt your body's natural ability to make melatonin. And when you take melatonin, you can take so much of it that your body's like, oh my gosh, you just gave me 9 milligrams of melatonin. And your body only naturally makes what, like, I don't know, one gram.
A tiny little bit.
Yeah. So, but you just love it. So you love it.
Sorry, I came down on the
That's
marijuana
okay.
And I said I like to take melatonin as a drug.
Wow, naughty. I mean, but melatonin is naturally produced in the body. It's the hormone of darkness. It's referred to by many people. So like just getting in the dark, making sure that your lights are turned down. Overhead lights in particular, I find at night particularly keep me awake. So we put on lamps that are like kind of below head height, that are facing down so that we can see, but you're not getting it in our eyes. That's how I try to naturally produce melatonin. But Dr. Ellen, you're taking melatonin and you'll love it. So amazing. I always have wanted to ask somebody this. So I've heard, I have 2 sons and I would love to be a father to a girl one day. And there's a lot of debate amongst parents whether it is possible to conceive with a sex in mind. Is it possible?
No, I wish. I have heard so many things about the sex position and the timing and like these caustic douches that people are doing. Have you heard about those? I don't even know.
Tell me what that is. Tell me what it is.
Vinegar, maybe? Are they doing? I don't know. I'm not. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Like apple cider vinegar or white vinegar. There's many different types of vinegars.
I think apple cider, but don't quote me. But no, it's unfortunately you can't even, there's also this super interesting concept that you could take sperm and spin it in a centrifuge. Of course, this involves, going to a doctor, but you have to spin the sperm in a centrifuge because the X-bearing sperm and the Y-bearing sperm, you can separate them just a little bit. It doesn't work. So, yeah.
And which sperm would make a boy and which sperm would make a girl?
So an X sperm would make a girl and a Y sperm would make a boy. Because it's all the man. Every woman's eggs is only X chromosomes. It's, if you're having the sex that you don't want, it's all on the man.
Well, what about because this is where we, as parents, when we're at the park and we're talking about this stuff, we say but in China, during the one-child policy, when everyone wanted a boy, they found a way. You're saying they didn't find a way.
They were terminating a lot of pregnancies.
Oh.
Yeah, it's awful. Sorry.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
Really bad. And that's why it became illegal to do. It became illegal in China to do any kind of ultrasound. Like the doctors weren't allowed to tell people the sex of the baby they were carrying with ultrasound. Really became a lot going on. Yeah.
Gosh, we can't end it here, Dr. Ellen. We have to find another.
So depressing.
We have to find another topic. So tell me about if you wouldn't mind, maybe a recent rewarding experience you've had with a client.
Oh, wow. There are so many. Yes. So I think that one of the things I want to talk about is that it's so important to personalize your patient's treatment and to make the right decision for people that's not just based on some kind of protocol that everybody needs the same thing, because everybody needs something different. And so I have had, a rewarding one recently. I had this lovely, lovely couple that just through a confluence of circumstances, she didn't have any obvious infertility factors, but her husband had extremely low sperm count, like almost no sperm. Like literally when he would give a sperm sample, they would be finding 1 sperm, 2 sperm, under the microscope. Yep. And so their only choice was to do IVF or in vitro fertilization. When you have that, when you have such few sperm, you have to pick them up under the microscope, you have to have an egg in a dish to be able to fertilize. You can't just like let them loose in her body. They'll never find the egg. So she was fertile, no fertility issues, but she had extremely low egg numbers. And when you have extremely low egg numbers, it's not the same thing as infertility, but it makes fertility treatment harder. And so it makes fertility treatment so inefficient and frustrating. And this couple, they were like, no, like, we want to try this. We want to do IVF so that we get my egg and his sperm, and we're going to make this happen. And we're going to, and they tried it. And I think we tried it twice. And both times she because her numbers were so low, IVF is not a perfect treatment. Like when you're dealing with very low numbers, sometimes you just don't get an egg out of the body. And I finally said to this couple, the answer for you is going to be donor sperm. I think that you have, this is like, I'm sorry, this is probably not what people want to hear either. It just was such an amazing story because this couple now has this beautiful child. And it was, so I said, the answer for you is going to be donor sperm. You are going to get pregnant inside your own body without manipulation. And they, and I have my patients are like my friends. She says, doctor, I want you to understand why I want to use my husband's sperm. Like, he's my high school sweetheart. We're both only children. And I said, 100%. I'm never, ever discounting that. But I think once you have a baby in your arms, you are both going to realize that that baby came into being because of your tireless effort to bring her to the earth, and your husband just doesn't have any sperm. And so that's what they did. And donor sperm, beautiful baby. She looks just like both of them, and nobody cares. It's like that. I don't know how you feel about this too, but it's like, now that I'm a mom, I think that I'm much more open to the concept that like a baby is like a ball of love, and like it doesn't know where its DNA came from. And, we have to always sort of focus on what is it that we want. And what we want is to be parents. What we want is to have that experience and to bring that love into the world.
Yeah. And the way that you connect with them doesn't matter that I don't connect with my son because he's my son genetically. I connect with him because he's gorgeous and so cute. Like, it's like, it's like with a puppy. Like, I don't love the dog because he's clearly not of my bones. Like, I love him because he's there, Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And that's so interesting. I hear that actually, in regards to sperm and sperm quality, that actually it can very quickly get better, much quicker than anybody thinks. It's like within a few months you can have much healthier sperm. Is that true?
If you don't have any kind of underlying significant issue, and you just work on lifestyle factors and all those antioxidant superfoods, then sure. Yeah, I've seen that a lot. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that. Best back to what we were saying about the two kids. I have some of our best friends are a gay couple, and they just had a baby. And, so it's clear that she's a little girl and she's clearly one of theirs, but the way that in which they both loved it, it just sends home what you just said, actually. I never even thought about it. I've always wondered if it would be awkward, but it wouldn't, because it's like, that's whether they're mine or not, they're mine, and I love them, and they smell so good and they're so cute. And once you bond, there's no difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I try to, I have so many, it's such a heavy field. Often, look, it's such a happy field, but it's also heavy a lot of the time. And I try really hard to zoom out and say, hey, what do we want for you? And how are we going to get you there?
Yeah, got it. Dr. Ellen, you seem like a great doctor. I'd love for you to be my doctor if I ever needed to come and see you. What is it like? What's the experience like if somebody comes to your clinic? Let's just say you come as a couple. What happens? We come in, we sit down, we talk to you, and what's the kind of process like?
So I start with a comprehensive evaluation of everything there is to know, because I want to know about every single pregnancy you've ever had. I want to know about every single period you've ever had, all of any medical problems in the past. I don't know what you do for work. You know, I want to really know my patients inside and out. There are so many things that are going to come into play to taking care of the whole person and the whole couple that I'm going to find out in that initial visit. I always do an ultrasound of the female partner at every single first visit. You know, a lot of people transitioned to telehealth and they haven't come back from it. And you can't do this without laying hands and laying eyes on the person that you're going to take care of. I learn so much about somebody. I pick up so many things by looking and seeing what her insides look like, to be able to start to plan. I mean, I literally say, now we're going to pause so I don't have to speak in hypotheticals anymore, because otherwise you go off in this like hypothetical talk that like is just wasting everybody's time. So if I'm going to tailor things directly to my patients the minute I start working with them. And then it's really just about hands-on personalized care. People want to know that not only did you give them the very best chance of having a baby, but also that you didn't miss anything, you didn't overlook anything, that every single detail is taken care of. And that's how I really make sure that I practice in my office. I do everything myself. I'm totally unable and unwilling to delegate to a PA or an ultrasonographer or anything. Like I catch things all the time.
Well, Dr. Ellen might sound like she's telling fibs about herself right now, but I tell you, in doing research about Dr. Ellen, I looked at her reviews, and everybody said how lovely it was to come and meet you, and they all said that they felt like they were your friend by the end of the process. So I think that says a lot about you, and thanks so much for coming on my show, The Zaddy Zone.
Yeah, this was really such a wonderful experience. I hope it was helpful for everyone who listened.
Yeah. Is there a way that we can keep in contact with you?
Yes. So my website is beverlyfertility.com, and you can find us there.
Okay, perfect. What about Instagram? Can we follow you there, or are you on any of the platforms other than that?
Also on Instagram at Beverly Fertility. I am working on a new line of videos where I'm going to talk about all of the hard questions and all of the hard, the tough things that I have to deal with, I think.
Yeah, good. You should, because I looked at your Instagram and I saw some of the videos and I was like, more. We need more of that.
We need more.
Out in the world. So you've realized that. But awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Ellen. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much.